Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle. And today I am going to be talking to Jeff Utecht. Jeff is an educational technology consultant, educator, and author. He holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction with a focus on technology, as well as his administrative certification through Washington State. Jeff began his career in elementary education at a public school in Washington, and in 2001, he was the recipient of the Bill and Melinda Gates grant called the Technology Leadership Program. I also do want to mention, because I know that our audience will find this interesting, that Jeff is the child of two teachers and that he has been rethinking education since his teenage years working his local farm in the Spokane Valley. And I love the fact that Jeff also loves sharing his ideas and strategies on ways educators can use technology in the classroom and how we must prepare our students for their future and not their past. So I want to start with that, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I want to start with that last thing I just said, preparing our students for the education of their future and not their past. So talk to us a little bit about what you mean when you say that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and just talk a little bit about technology and where we are today in K-12 education. And, I think this is a focus, especially coming out of the last couple of years we've come out of and looking at the future of, and it's the essential question that is always on the front of my mind. How are we preparing students for their future and not our past? And one of the things that I think of when we're thinking about this, especially as K-12 teachers, one of the things we have to start understanding is our job is to prepare kids for college, career, and life. I mean, that is where we want them to be at the end of 12 years of public education. And I think there's three things to that, right? If we're preparing kids for college, well, what does that look like today? And I have a goddaughter who just went off to university. I've had kids who I've taught in the past who've gone out to university. And I think number one, when it comes to a technology lens, universities, whether you are going to a community college or a four-year university, expect you to know how to navigate some kind of learning management system, an LMS. Whether that is Canvas, whether that is Google Classroom, if we are not graduating students understanding how to turn in assignments, having online conversations, having a discussion thread, being able to take an online quiz, being able to watch your lecture in a video or podcast format, we are doing them a disservice in preparing them for their future if they decide to go into university. Mm-hmm. Let's say they decide to go directly into the workplace. Great. I have not found a corporation that has an onboarding program that isn't digital, that doesn't work through Canvas or Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams. And so even if you go directly into the workplace, there's a technology component that there's an expectation that you know how to learn with and through technology. So my question is constantly coming back then. What are we doing in K-12 to support that? What are we doing in our middle school and high school to start building this? How do you have a good online conversation? Do you know how to take a quiz and get that feedback? Do you know how to hit your due dates? Even my goddaughter, when we were down visiting her, she's going to university down in New Orleans. Lucky her. She had to get an assignment done because it's due at midnight. And all of a sudden it's 11:50 at night and she forgot this assignment's due. And at university, you don't just get to turn them in a little bit late. They are either due or you don't get any points. Mm-hmm. And so even figuring those things out as a freshman in college is added stress that you don't need when you're going to university. We all remember those stresses of being a freshman in the first year of being away from home. There's so much other stress. Trying to learn how to learn through Canvas or learn through Blackboard is a stress that we can help students take off their plate. And so that's just one of those things that I'm constantly helping and talking to schools about is how do we start creating that system? Mm-hmm. The second part of that is if depending on your state, and I'm not sure where you're at, but here in the state of Washington, in Washington State, at the state level, they have a contract with Canvas. And many educators have probably heard of Canvas if you don't use it. So here in the state of Washington, we're really focused in our K-12 schools. By the time you hit high school, we want all of our public schools to be using Canvas, because if a student in our public school system decides to go to a 2-year college or community college, a technical school, or a public university here in the state of Washington, they all use Canvas. And so we are there, you don't even have to use a new program. We can use that program in middle school, high school, and start training kids so that when they go to university, it's just seamless. It's just seamless. And when you have kids doing running start, or you have kids doing college credits in the high school classroom, and you're using the same platform, we're just helping and supporting kids through a technology in a very seamless way. So those are just some ideas and things to be thinking about as K-12 educators.
Yeah. So with that being said, that kind of brings me to another topic. And actually, I'm going to veer off of what I was going to ask you before we started based on what you just said, because now I'm intrigued on what you think about this. So I know that COVID, that sort of pushed us and was the catalyst for folks in the classrooms and students, right? High school age kids, elementary, middle school, whatever, K through 12, to be forced into using online technology for class. So we learned it, we did it to the best of our ability. But now that we're all back in school, do you think that has continued us to move forward, or that we've sort of just bounced right back into not using the technology now that we're back in the classrooms?
That's such a great question. And I like to use the analogy of a rubber band. As we went through the pandemic, and every educator who is listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. We went through the pandemic and we were stretched. You take a rubber band and we pulled that sucker to the capacity of what K-12 education could do, regardless of what state you were in, regardless of whatever was happening in your neck of the wood. We took that rubber band and we stretched that sucker as far as it could go. And there is a human psychology that when you've been stretched that far, you want to snap back, right? You want to get back to what is normal. And we saw this. I think this year specifically, I'm hearing from teachers of, I don't want to be on a computer. I don't want to do another Zoom call with my kids. I don't want to go to another PD session over Zoom. I'm sick and tired of it. I want my kids in the classroom. I want them off screens, and I just want to do the work that I want to do. And so part of that mindset, and it's not a wrong mindset, is this snapback that we are getting because we were stretched so far. I mean, we were innovating at the speed of technology, right? Which education just doesn't move that fast, nor should it. And so there's this snapback effect. But here's the problem. The problem is we in education are trying to snap back to 2019 when things were quote unquote normal. Our communities are not. And that is something to remember. Our communities, our parents aren't snapping back. One of the biggest pushbacks that I'm seeing right now is parents, because this is a mindset, parents are saying, look, well, you know how to teach online now. So instead of waiting until winter break when airline prices go through the roof, we're just going to go on a family vacation on an off month. And my kid can still go to school because you all know how to do that online thing now, right? And that online thing is just like my kid being in the classroom, right? Like that's what you told me for 3 years. And so I don't have to wait till summer vacation when flights are expensive, or go visit, grandparents, or go do the family thing. I can do that anytime during the year. And oh, by the way, school, you figure out how to make sure my child doesn't get behind. That's on you. And that is added pressure where I think we're wrestling with this. And a lot of the school districts I'm working with, we're wrestling with this idea of we want kids in front of us all the time, every day, because that's what we know. We know that's good for kids. But yet our society is saying, yeah, but I want my kid to go do this. I want to experience that. And you know how to do this now because we just went through it. And I expect that same level of engagement online. And that's where I think we're starting to move away. And we can talk about this if you want. We're moving away from this idea of blended learning into high flex learning models in K-12 schools. And that right now is, I think, a big kind of transition that we're still trying to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, I do actually want to talk to you about blended learning. That's definitely on my list. But I also want you to touch back on something that you said, because you started talking a little bit about communities. And I know in a lot of your talks, a lot of your presentations, a lot of the things that I've seen of you that I've listened to and watched, you do talk about community trumps content. So explain that a little bit and talk to our listeners about what you mean when you say community trumps content.
Yeah, and this is it's part of a TED talk that I did around community Trump's content, and quite a few other talks. If you just put in Jeff Utecht and go to YouTube, you're going to find a lot around this idea of community Trump's content. And where this came from is, when I was doing some research for my TED talk, I found that one of the actual creators of the World Wide Web as we know it today talked about when they created the internet, when they were creating this thing, the idea was community. And one of the things that the creators of the internet were really interested in was, how does the internet actually create community? And I think to this day, that's really still the focus. We forget sometimes that the idea behind being connected, whether it's through a cell phone or through a laptop, I mean, you and I are in two different states, and look at this. We're recording high quality audio, looking at each other's, like, we're building community and capacity through the internet. And I want us to remember that as teachers. I feel a lot of times we get too focused on, what is the content? How do I get my students to go and research something on Google, or whether or not I trust Wikipedia? Or we get focused on, what's the content that I can do, instead of figuring out, how do I use this very powerful tool to connect my kids with other people? I mean, the reason why social media is what social media is because it connects people, for better or for worse. For better or for worse, what makes social media so powerful is it connects us. That's the basis of what the internet was. Before that, it was chat rooms. Like, when the internet came out, it was all about chat rooms. And if anybody remembers AOL back in the day, the first thing that AOL had, chat rooms. It was a way to connect us. And so as educators, how are we finding a way to get our kids connected through the internet? Whether it's things like Skype in the classroom, or inside Flipgrade, you can have Flip Pals. There's so many different ways that we can connect. Don't forget, how do I create community with my technology? Yes, the online quizzes are fun. And yes, being able to fill out a Google form that automatically corrects itself is fantastic. And being able to watch every YouTube video that you need to learn something is amazing. But at the same time, how am I supporting my kids in reaching out to universities before we ever get there? Or I want to go directly into the trades. Fantastic. Go find somebody that you can bring into my classroom over a Zoom call. Everybody knows Zoom, for better or for worse. The one thing that came out of the pandemic is everybody knows this thing called Zoom. You can have classroom people. You can have people coming into your classroom every day because you can do it from your cell phone. Mm-hmm. How am I connecting my kids? And that's really a big part of the focus. How do I bring community into my classroom? Both kids in my classroom being a community, but also then broadening their community with this incredible thing we call the internet.
Yeah. So this is now bringing me to the topic that I know we're going to hit, whether it's now or later in the podcast, but it's something that I talk about in a lot of my podcasts because I feel really strongly about this, cell phone usage in the classroom, because you're talking about, how do we connect, to community? How do we teach kids to connect? So talk to us a little bit about how teachers can actually utilize cell phones in a positive learning way for students.
Yeah, and cell phones right now are, and have been, and will continue to be for a while, the hot topic, I think, when it comes to technology in the classroom. There's a couple things. And the first thing is, it's not going away. I think that's the first thing we have to understand. Mm-hmm. And whether we like them or not, whether you like cell phones in your classroom or not, it's a fight that we're going to lose. I mean, let's just be honest. They're not going away. We're going to lose them. And I'm going to date myself here a little bit. I was in elementary and middle school do you remember when the watch came out that had a calculator on it?
Yeah.
And sitting in math class, you could do scientific on your watch. And we fought that. We fought calculators in the classroom up until every kid had to buy a $150 calculator to come to class.
Yeah.
And the cell phone is going through the exact same thing. We are fighting it. We don't know how to use it. We are struggling with understanding how this generation sees their life through the cell phone. And so that's where we're at, and it's not right or wrong. This is what happens is new technologies come into our society, and it's part of our job as educators to say, okay, well, where does this fit? How does this fit? So I want to just, know that that's where we're at, but it's not going to go away. The sooner we start thinking about, okay, how do I start using this next technology? How do I start incorporating it into my classroom? I need to flip my own mental script. How do I go from blocking technology to using technology? And once we get on the other side of that, then we start thinking about, okay, well, what are classroom management things that change? My favorite thing, I was a substitute teacher for a long time, even when I moved back here to the States after coming back from international. And first thing I did, even as a substitute teacher, everybody take out your cell phone. I don't want it in the backpack. I don't want it in your hoodie with the pockets in it where I can't see it. Every cell phone, top right-hand corner, including mine, educators. One of the things that frustrates me the most is every kid's got to put their phone out, and then the teacher gets to go over to the desk and still be texting or doing whatever they're doing. Everybody's cell phone, top right-hand corner. And I want it there because A, I see it. B, I see it. And C, when it's time to use it, we all know where it's at. We all know that right there is the cell phone. And then we start to engage with it. Can you send me a voice memo? Instead of writing everything all the time, and I'm not saying that writing's bad, we still need kids to write, but every once in a while, or maybe you have a kid like myself who's dyslexic, writing something is going to take me twice as long than it is to pick up my cell phone, click the voice recording app that is free with every cell phone, record my thoughts and mail it to the teacher. I mean, there's so many little pieces that you can use with that we start thinking about. The big one, and I think the thing that we are missing the most right now in education, is we know that social media is a problem with this generation. We know that they are looking at their phones more than we would like them to. Are we having the conversation? Or are we just saying, keep it in your backpack, keep it in your locker. You can bring it to school, but I don't want to use it because if I see it, it would mean I'd have to have a conversation about how do you use it appropriately. Yeah. And whenever we do that, we're basically sending a message to kids. I don't like your culture. I don't understand the culture that you have. I'm not willing to learn about your culture. Just keep your culture over there. You and your TikTok dances can just be over there for a second. I don't want to have to try and think about, okay, this is the new cool thing. How do I do that? And, my wife is a school counselor, was a school counselor for over 20 years. And we can force the technology outside of school all we want. The problem is almost every bullying thing that she dealt with was something that started on social media outside of school hours and then finds its way back into the classroom, finds its way back into the school. Yeah. I've never had a school, and maybe there's one out there. I've not had a school who had students have cell phones, who had students had technology, banned all the technology of the cell phones, and can show me statistics that cyberbullying actually went down. So let's deal with it. And it's more complicated than I'm making it sound. And I know that it's a long journey that every district, school, and teacher is going through. But at some point we have to get on the other side of, hey, it's here. I don't like it. You don't have to like it, but you have to understand these kids are 13, 14, and 15 years old. They've been touching devices here in America. The average child touches a device at 18 months. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying those are the statistics. So you're dealing with a 13-year-old who's literally grown up with finger clicking a screen. And we're not going to take that away. You're not going to take that away in 1 year of sixth grade or 8 years of middle school, high school. You're just not. And so we've got to figure it out. We have to figure out how do we use this in the classroom, whether it's playing things like Quizalize or Kahoot that you can use the cell phone for some engagement. Put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up. It's the way I love using technology in the classroom. In a good one-to-one classroom, you should be using technology less of the time, not more of the time. Yeah. Because I'm using it for very specific purposes and I'm on it and I'm off it and I'm on it and I'm off it. There should never be this time where I open up a laptop and 50 minutes goes by and it's close the laptop and go back, leave the class for the day. I want in and out, in and out, in and out. Conversations with my friend, go look something up, close my laptop, go do something, come back, research something, That's what a healthy classroom looks like.
Right. Yeah. No, and I love the fact that you're talking about just like a good balance of, yes, you have to have boundaries and you have to have expectations, and the students have to be, you have to be able to engage the students. But to just take it away and expect them not to want to revert back to that. It's funny. I was in a classroom a couple weeks ago, and a teacher was trying to give their kiddos some information from a science packet, the old 3-page worksheet packet. And one of the kiddos pulled out their cell phone and was going to Google one of the questions to find to figure out what the answer was, and the knowledge that the teacher was wanting them to have. And they probably spent more time arguing over not using Google instead of the worksheet packet to get the same exact answer than they did just on the lesson. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I don't understand. Like, if the end result is to know the content and to understand the concept that you're trying to teach them, does it matter if they get it from a piece of paper or from Google? Because you probably got it from Google to put on the piece of paper.
Probably. Right? And we talk about this a lot with, we talk a lot about this with educators. If you are asking questions that Google can answer, you're asking the wrong questions.
Right.
And for better or for worse, we live in a world right now in 2022 that is incredible. I mean, there is more information around us than we ever need. And so we, as educators, need to step up and say, okay, if I can Google the answer to this, how do I change the question? And I'll just here's a pro tip for every teacher out there. What Google cannot do and does not do very well is compare and contrast. So don't ask a question that asks for an answer. Mm-hmm. Ask a question that compares or contrasts two things together. Because, and I'm saying two things that aren't exactly related. Compare this to that. Then let kids go use Google, because you have to look up what thing A is, what thing B is, and then the human mind has to decide how are they similar and different. Yeah. Google can't do that for you in simple searches. That's a quick hack. Turn all your questions into compare and contrast. Compare what we learned in the last book we read to the book we're reading now. What are the character traits that are the same or different? Go research these different characters, and you have to come up with the answer. Google won't tell you. They'll tell you about the characters. They'll tell you the character traits, but they're not going to do the comparison for you. Mm-hmm. It's just not. We're not to that point yet.
Yeah, and I love that tip. Hack. I love it. I love that tip. Go jeffutecht.com for all your pro tips. That's a good one. I mean, not only that, but like effortful thinking and drawing attention to meaning and all these things that we have to process. Like, Google is the foundation, but then your mind has to take it one step further. So I love that. Okay. So let's roll back into blended learning. So what is blended learning? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's a really good question. There's a lot of different definitions of what blended learning is. In my mind, the way I define it is blended learning is using the right resource and the right pedagogical approach at the right time. And that is incorporating everything that we know to be best practice in the classroom. And one of the things we have to understand is best practice. When we say best practice, it is changing. It is constantly changing. When we talk about pedagogical understanding of what it means to be a learner today, what the information coming out around neuroscience and how the brain learns best, that all leads into this thing that we call education, that we as teachers should be passionate and love. You should love this as an educator, right? This idea of always being a learner. So when we're talking about blended learning, we're talking about how am I using the best thing at the best moment in my classroom? And for better or for worse, after the pandemic, almost every school district is 1-to-1. Most of our students are 2-to-1. Most of them have a laptop and a phone. Mm-hmm. That's just more resources in your classroom. My job as a teacher is how do I create a classroom situation that allows them to go and Google something for 5 minutes, close the laptop, have a conversation. Go out and do some more research, Google something for 15 minutes, or go look something up on Instagram, or go watch your TikTok, because today's generation, for better or for worse, their number one search engine for information today is TikTok. That's a little bit mind-blowing to me, and I don't understand how it works, but I'm also not 14 years old. So, but we have to understand there are ways that they're getting their information. Okay, but how am I using that? In a blended classroom, I need to understand that there is more content than my textbook will ever hold that these kids have available to. And in fact, my textbook is one of many different pieces of information. And depending on the year of your textbook, I like to call textbooks historical nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now in the world we live in 2022, the half-life of knowledge is roughly 14 months, meaning half of everything that you were taught, everything that you think you know to be true, has changed, been updated, or reconfirmed in every 14 months, which means if you have a textbook that's older than 2 years old, it's out of date. It's historical. I love going into classrooms. You talk about blended learning. Hey, here's what your 5-year-old textbook says. Is that still true today? What has changed today? What new science has been found today?
Mm-hmm.
They just found new bones from Neanderthals in Russia, changing our understanding of how Neanderthals traveled this world. Game changer. That was last week. you know? And so when we're talking about a blended learning classroom, it's not technology or no technology. It's
Mm-hmm.
how am I blending these two together, that I'm using this incredible, powerful resource that I have at my fingertips, and wanting kids to talk to each other, wanting kids to build relationships in the classroom, having great conversations and understanding how protocols work so I can have students having really deep, meaningful conversations around the content they just
Mm-hmm.
learned. My favorite piece of technology in a classroom is a timer. And I don't care if it's a timer where you go to Google and say, hey, Google, set a timer for 5 minutes, or you have the old egg timer. I don't care. Have a timer, because when you say, hey, that was a really good question you just asked, I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. Everybody go research and find out what you can find. At the end of 5 minutes, all right, everybody close your laptop, turn and talk. What did you find? What do we know? How do you know it's true? Where did you get your information? How do you know you can verify that website? All right,
Mm-hmm.
what did we learn? Great. How does that add to our information that we already know? And then we continue on the lesson, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's being able to combine these things together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. I mean, the other part, and I'll just touch on the high flex stuff. High flex is a term that came out during the pandemic, and it's really where we're seeing, I think, education is going to go. I think we're going to be forced to go that way from our communities and our parents a bit. And this idea of high flex is different than what we think about it in a K-12 in a quick K-12 situation where we went through the pandemic, and in some places, not all the places, but in some places, we were trying to live stream into the classroom while we also had kids in the classroom with us. There is no research to support that. There's very little research that shows that even works at a university where kids are paying $40,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
There's no research to support that in a K-12 classroom. So when we talk about high flex learning, we're not talking about streaming kids into class. That's like one of the worst things that you can do. What we're talking about is creating situations where I, as a teacher, am thinking about every child all the time and what do they need. And that, for better or for worse, is going to mean I start thinking about my Google Classroom first, my Canvas, my Blackboard, my Microsoft Teams. How am I creating content? How am I creating a pathway? I call them pathways. How do we create a pathway of learning for students that, regardless of where they are, they will have access to this? That's going to mean using something like Moat, where there's some audio directions, or it might be having to create instructional videos, which are not going to go away and are actually considered best practice in 2022, right? How am I going to create this stuff? And then when I have kids in front of me in the classroom, I just pull the pieces out that you don't need to watch that video because you're here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not here, the video's already made for you, right? So we have to be thinking of everywhere all the time first, and then backing out to our classrooms, rather than thinking about our classrooms first. And then, oh yeah, I'll throw some extra worksheets up there for the kids that couldn't make it today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a big mental shift that I think we're going to go through in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting as I'm listening to you talk, I'm also thinking about, you're talking about getting students ready for college or career, and they're not going to be sitting around by themselves reading textbooks. They're going to be working in a group, collaborating, trying to figure out a solution to a problem. And so, I just want to reiterate too on your process piece is that instead of trying to, you're talking about blending technology with this piece and pulling all these different pieces. It's kind of like a roadmap, and that's kind of how I've always thought of it, like a backwards design. What do I really want my students to be able to do at the end of the day, the week, the month, the quarter, the semester, whatever? Now, how do I pull pieces in to make that learning effective and meaningful and something that they could take with them and use that's applicable to their next stages in life. And so, I think just moving away from the scope and sequence of we're doing this on day one, we're doing this on day two, we're doing this on day three, no matter what. It's just like, and we're all gonna say the same thing, and the scripted curriculums and those types of things.
Yeah, so true.
We probably could solve all the problems of the world, Jeff, if we just had.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean,
if we had unlimited funds but I think you're right. I think education's, you mentioned scope and sequence, and I agree. I mean, that was something that was, hard and true up until 2020. I think we're going to see it go away. I mean, the problem is you can't have personalized learning with scope and sequence and everybody on the same page at the same time. Those two things are at opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And if we say we want personalized, individualized learning for every child, you can't scope and sequence it. And so I think, we're just going to see a lot of these things that we, try, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough because, schools spent millions of dollars creating scopes and sequences that we're just going to have to at some point say like, you know what? It worked. It worked for the time period that we needed it, but we're in a different time period and we've got to go in a different direction. We still have our standards, and our standards are our scope and sequence. And I love backwards by design is I still make my presentations are backwards by design. Every training that we create is backwards by design. I mean, it's such a great model. What is it that I want my students to do, and work backwards and create the pathway to get them there. With choice and flexibility.
Tell me about, so we only have a few minutes left, but I have a question that I can't wait to hear your answer to this. If you could only have your students, and I got this from you, if you could only have your students visit one website, what would it be?
If I could only have my students visit one website, what would it be? This is probably going to shock people. Wikipedia.
Oh.
Wikipedia is my one website. If you want to, over at shiftingschools.com, under our free resources, you can download how to verify any Wikipedia page in 3 clicks. I think that is the most underutilized resource that we have at our fingertips today. I am lucky enough to be of an age where every classroom that I walked into for my entire schooling career, there was a set of encyclopedias on the bottom set of, bookshelves. And yet I cannot find that for almost every classroom I go into. It's one of the first things I look for when I go into a classroom. Where's your set of encyclopedias? People are like, I don't have an encyclopedia. Well, do kids use Wikipedia? Well, you can't trust Wikipedia. So we've literally taken, we took encyclopedias out of the classroom. The thing that replaced it was Wikipedia. And then you tell kids not to trust it and you can't use it. And here's the thing. There's been research done. And the last time we even did research was in 2015 because the argument's over. Wikipedia is better than your textbook. It has been shown against social studies textbooks, against math textbooks. You would be better off and have less errors if you just taught from Wikipedia than if you taught from a 5-year-old textbook. How crazy is that? And that's without even knowing how to verify the Wikipedia page you're on. Every Wikipedia page has a rating of F through A. You might have heard that scale somewhere before. And all we have to do as teachers is teach kids, how do you find the rating so you know to trust the A pages and not trust the F pages. So even if I'm a homeschool parent or any teacher in the classroom, the last thing I want teachers to say is like, well, you can't trust it because one time I read this page where there was something wrong on it. You're right. Sometimes we get stuff wrong. You know what's so cool about Wikipedia? Anybody can edit it. Do you know what makes Wikipedia so powerful? It's anybody can edit it. Not everybody edits your textbook. Everybody can edit Wikipedia. So if you're in education and you see something wrong on a Wikipedia page, it is your obligation to go in, click the edit button. You just one button, it says edit. It's very easy to find, and make it right. Now, if I'm a teacher, or let's say I'm a parent homeschooling my kids, I'm going to go find pages where maybe there's not a lot of information, especially if it's something local. You have a local church or a local museum piece, or there's a lot of local stuff that somebody started the page, but there's very little information there. Instead of writing the report for me, the teacher, why don't you go write the report for the world and tell them about that statue down on the corner that you pass every day? You're going to have to go research it and learn its background, and you're going to write, but you're just going to write it on Wikipedia for everybody else. And you get to be part of this incredible community of people building the largest body of knowledge ever known by mankind. You get to be an author of it. That's the incredible piece.
Well, I can promise you that people that listen to this podcast, I guarantee it, are now going to be going and telling people about what they just learned, what you could do on Wikipedia, and they're going to be going and trying it. So I'm pretty sure you probably just influenced a lot of people to expand their use of Wikipedia.
Yeah, and if you go to
I'm
Google,
going to try.
Yeah, go to Google, type in Jeff Utecht Wikipedia. You're probably going to find a video or part of a video. And it's funny, I did a talk with the UN. The UN Development Program had me in to talk about education globally. And they asked me a very similar question, like, regardless of where you are in the world and what language you speak, what website? I'm like, Wikipedia. It's in Arabic. It's in Tagalog.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what your language is. Everybody can be doing it.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible resource. I mean, it sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. So it's good stuff.
So tell everybody where they can find you and all of your great stuff.
Awesome. So you can get started over at jeffutecht.com, and we'll make sure that's in the show notes, I'm sure. And then I've got the website that has all the resources called Shifting Schools. That's the name of the podcast at shiftingschools.com. We've got our own podcast over there. We just finished a mini series on data literacy, where we went out and we interviewed a bunch of people in the corporate world who do data literacy. Like, we have a guy from the New York Times and some other, one of the top 25 entrepreneurs from Sweden, talking about why is data literacy so important today in preparing students for their future and not our past, and what are some of the skills that are needed around that. So those are kind of some of the things we cover on the podcast. So it's Shifting Schools. It's the podcast. You can find that everywhere podcasts are. And while you're over at Shifting Schools, up at the very top, shiftingschools.com, there's one link there that says free guides. We have almost 70 free guides. All you do is put in your email address and you can download as many as you want. There is teaching kids how to Google search the right way. There's learning how to trust Wikipedia in 3 clicks. There's a million different protocols. My good friend and colleague, Trisha Friedman, that is just how she geeks out. She's an educator as well, and she loves making guides for teachers. So we've got a ton of them over there. So yeah, jeffutecht.com, shiftingschools.com, and then everywhere on social networks, you can find me. I am on TikTok, no dancing, a lot of interviews. But you can find me over there as well.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And just as he said, we will have all of Jeff's information and links to his websites in the show description. And I really appreciate you coming on the show, Jeff. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Kristy Houle signing out for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast. And don't forget to check out all of our great resources on the Educate.today website.